Hi, my name is Rachel. I am really excited to work with you on a no-knead bread. So what is really unique about this is that it does involve a lot of time, but it's mostly inactive time. So where you'll be going in and giving the dough a fold, we'll mix the dough together, we'll later on let it rise, we'll shape it, we'll bake it, all these different steps. All leading up to that requires a long but very important time known as fermentation. So what happens during that fermentation time is that there is acids and carbon dioxide being produced. What happens is that the acids help to give your dough strength and flavor. The carbon dioxide is going to be where we get that lightness and that rise, that volume. So this step, bulk fermentation is what it's referred to as, is really, really important for us to get a nice tender loaf or the chew that we want to with a loaf and depth in flavor. So that's kind of the really key characteristic to a no-knead bread that really sets it apart from a dough that would have otherwise been mixed for a longer period of time and then fermented for a shorter period of time. So what we're going to do here, all that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get this dough mixed. So we have our flour, and we're going to add to that our yeast and our salt and our water. So I'm going to start by going into my flour's in my bowl. I'm adding that water, the yeast, and it's just a little bit of yeast, and the salt. Then we're going to stir this up. It's going to come together, but as kind of a shaggy, separated dough. It seems like it might need more hydration, meaning like more water. But what's going to happen is over the next 12 to 18 hours, that flour is going to fully hydrate. And what will happen is that will allow the dough to become a little less stiff. It'll become more even, also start to form some bubbles. All that's going to happen over, like I said, 12 to 18 hours. That is that bulk fermentation time. So you see here, all we really did was just mix together to combine. That's all you are essentially looking for to do with this. If you do notice, however, that you still weren't able to get it all combined by spatula, by spoon, whatever it is that you may have been working with, then get in there with your hand. Bring that last little bit together. So I'm doing just kind of a gentle press and fold over. That's known as kneading. I know we are saying this is a no-knead bread, but I just had to go in there for just two or three quick turns in the bowl to just bring it together. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and cover it up. And what I love to do when I'm working on anything that has different stages in the process, specifically this is going to come in really handy when I'm working with breads and yeast leavened products, is because there's different stages where we mix, we bulk ferment, we shape, we proof. I like to label each part of the process. So I will go ahead and show you what that looks like. So you can see here I have the plastic wrap covering my dough in the bowl. I have the marker written out with just the time. This is going to help me know exactly where my dough was in the process at what time. So what you are ultimately looking for, I kind of described a little bit earlier, but we are looking for anywhere between 12 to 18 hours before we go in and shape this dough. Then it will proof and bake. So when we shape it, we want this to become a little bit more hydrated. It's also going to start to develop strength as it sits. So it's important that we give it plenty of time for that because it's a no-knead bread. When we knead, we develop gluten, which provides a lot of strength. The longer you knead, so the longer you would mix your dough, the less fermentation time you typically need. And so, because we did very minimal mixing, we need a much longer fermentation time. So we're looking for 12 to 18 hours. So this is a good indicator for me to go, okay, I finished this at 135. So I want to come back to this at least 135 later in the day. So 12 hours later. But you can also go up to 18 hours. You'll develop more flavor. You'll also see maybe a little bit of a difference in the volume. We're also looking for some bubbles to form on the surface. So like I said, it's a lot of inactive time. So I'm just going to let this sit, check on it periodically, and then we'll come back to it in somewhere between that 12 to 18 hours. And then we'll go from there and continue on with the process with our shaping. Okay, so after about 18 hours, our dough is ready. It has fermented, again, over a long period of time, and this has allowed it to gain a lot of strength that we would have all otherwise gained in the kneading process. It's also allowing my dough to begin to get flavor. So it's going to be a little bit acidic. You're going to smell the kind of yeastiness that it's going to have. So I'm going to uncover it. And then you can see there's little bubbles that are starting to form around the surface here. It's nothing very, it's not large bubbles. It's not super, super obvious, but you can see just a little bit of work happening here. It's also more hydrated. We talked about that. So as it had begun that fermentation process over time, it had gained that hydration from that water, whereas it was a little bit more shaggier at the beginning of the process. And so we are going to go in and do our first stretch and fold, our first and only stretch and fold. This is going to help us to gain a little bit more strength and also start our initial shaping process. So I have a little dish of water. I'm just dipping my fingers in the water, and then I'm going to pull from the one side up and over. I'm going to dip my fingers again, and I'm going to rotate and go up and over. So I'm stretching up and folding over. Rotate last time. So if you think of kind of your dough being a square, you're going with each kind of side of the square that I'm going to do that stretch and fold. So then this is an excellent point to let this sit for another 15 to 30 minutes. We want to let this rest a little bit because now we work that gluten just a little bit more. So we let it rest, and then I am going to cover it. I'm going to put the time on there again. So then I know, okay, when did I finish this? When am I ready to go in and finish that next step? Okay, so at this point, the dough is rested for about 20 minutes. So again, anywhere between 15, 30 minutes or so. You can walk away if you want to. We're gonna go in and do the shaping. So then it'll proof and bake after that. So with the shaping, it is, like I've mentioned, a very hydrated dough. So because of that, it has a very kind of loose structure. It's not gonna be very easy to shape. So it's very minimal shaping then that's going to go into it. So you can see, it does look like it has even a little bit more structure. You can see it has some pull to it. That's what that stretch and fold helped to do. So there's a few options that you have for shaping. First option is you can go onto a floured work surface, shape it into a ball, and then put it into a flour-lined bowl. And I like to, if I'm doing that, put a towel in the bowl, dust it with flour, and then put my dough back inside. I'm going to show you a slight alternative to this. So instead of a towel, it's going to be parchment paper. And the reason for that is because it may get a little bit tricky to actually go in, and after your dough's been proofed, so it'll have more volume, it'll be lighter, it'll be a little bit more delicate. After that stage, that proofing stage is done, you would need to put this into our cast iron pan to bake. So if you try to just lift that out and then turn it back over, it can be a little tricky. So I want to show you an alternative way. So I'm going to go in, and on my work surface, I am going in with some flour and a pretty good amount of flour. Then I'm going to go in my hands, I want flour on, and I'm going to gently release the dough. If you have a spatula to use, if you have a scraper of some sort, all of that would work. Then I'm going to cover the top with more flour. I'm also getting it on my hands. I'm going to loosely kind of tuck under. So if I am sticking, I'm just going in with more flour. So I'm sticking to the paper a little bit, so I'm going to go in, lift, more flour. So I'm just kind of tucking to round it out. You may have noticed too, is when you removed it from your pan initially, it already had a roughly round shape. That's because it was in that bowl. So it shouldn't be that much more to just loosely round it out. So at this step, this is where if you were going to do a towel-lined bowl, you would lift your dough up and put it into your towel-lined bowl. So I'm going to show you kind of an idea of what that would be. So you can clean the bowl that you were already using while your dough was resting shaped on the counter, or you can get a fresh bowl. Either one would work. So here's option one. you would take a towel and place it into your bowl like this, and you dust it with flour. You would lift your dough up and place it into your flour dusted towel upside down. So the seam would be on the top. So then when it's done proofing, you would lift out the towel and you would flip your dough upside down. So now the seam's back on the bottom and the top of the loaf is on the top. And you would put that into your cast iron pan to bake. I'm giving you a little bit of an easier route to take. So this is where that parchment paper comes in handy. So what I'm going to do instead is I am going to lift my parchment paper into my bowl, like so. So where this is going to make it a little bit easier for yourself is that when we're ready to bake this off, you don't have to do any flipping. You don't have to turn your dough over, especially because your cast iron pan is going to be hot. So we don't want to have to mess with any kind of weird variables that maybe you could burn yourself or something like that. Let's make it a little bit more approachable. So all I'm going to have to do then is lift the parchment paper out and place it into my cast iron dish. Parchment paper can handle the heat, so it's okay that it stays in the cast iron pan while it bakes. So this will get covered, and we want to look for this to roughly double in size. I'm looking for somewhere around 2 hours is where it will most likely be. So then as our baking dish, I'm using something, this is the one that I have. You're looking for something around 6 quarts, give or take. So the cast iron's nice because it's going to really lock in the steam. It's going to help us form a really nice crust because we don't have all the abilities of injecting steam into our ovens like professional bakeries do. So how can we get closer to that? Having a cast iron pan really helps with that. So this is going to go into our oven and preheat with the oven. What I would recommend, because our proof time is about an hour, is it's about 2 hours. I would recommend setting a 1 hour timer. At 1 hour, I would turn on your oven with your cast iron pan in the oven. So it's all preheating together. You don't need to have that going and warming everything up for 2 hours. You can, just don't have to. So then at that roughly 2 hour mark then, we should be around doubled in size. Depending on your environment, it could be less time, it could be more time. So it may need an hour and a half if it's warm in your kitchen. It may need 2.5 hours if it's cold in your kitchen. So it does depend. We're looking for roughly doubled in size. After about 2 hours, our dough is proofed, it has risen, and we are ready to bake. So you can see here is our volume increase that we're looking at. And so this was just on my counter is all I was looking for, just enough time so that it doubles in size. So this is where the ease comes in with that parchment paper. So my pot right here is out of the oven. This had been preheating at 450 degrees. So that pot's really hot. So make sure you have your towels, your hot pot holders, whatever it is that you need to use. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift with my parchment and I'm going to put it right into my pot. So then it's very easy. It's very approachable. An alternative would be that you're flipping out of the towel lined bowl. Again, whichever way that you decide that you want to do it, whatever way works best for you. Before we bake this off, we do want to allow somewhere for the steam to release. So I have a serrated knife, and I'm just going to go in kind of on an angle and just create a little pocket somewhere for my bread to release that steam. Otherwise, it'll crack. You might get some little blowouts, like some big pockets that build. Needs somewhere for that steam to release. So a serrated knife, a razor blade, something like that is usually the best bet. If you're having difficulty with that part of it, you can always go in and flour your knife and flour the top of your bread if it's just kind of sticking and you're not able to drag through. But again, just a little steam release is all we're looking for. I'm going to put my lid back on. Again, remember everything is hot. And then this is going to go back into the oven. And another alternative, if you don't have a cast iron pot, what you could do is you could have had your loaf proofing just on your parchment paper. On the back of a sheet pan would be a good place to have it. And then what you can do is when you're ready to bake after it's been proofed, you can lift off that parchment paper piece of dough, put it into the oven on a sheet pan that's hot. So you want to have it in there preheating with your oven, just like our cast iron was. And then I'll stick a stainless steel bowl on top. Either way, between the cast iron pot, between the bowl on top of the pan, or on a stone if you have a stone, what that does is keep steam in, so it keeps some moisture on the crust, so it allows you to get a crispier crust because it doesn't immediately start setting up when it hits that high heat. That's what the steam helps to do. It gives you a better crust, and it also helps with browning. So we're going to go into the oven for about 30 minutes. We're looking to just get this baking, get it almost baked. I'm not going to see all the color yet. That's going to come after we take our lid off. So that'll happen in about 30 minutes. So after about 30 minutes in the oven, we take the lid off. And you can see how we're getting beautiful volume. It's still very pale. So this is where we're going to go about 15 minutes more in the oven while it browns. After about 45 minutes in the oven total, our bread is done, and I am excited for you to see this. So you want to be really careful handling it. I've let it cool for about 15 minutes, but I just lift that parchment paper right out. So that's the ease of the parchment paper. Then you just peel back, so you're left with that parchment paper ready. That goes in the garbage, and you have your beautiful loaf of bread. So you can kind of hear, it sounds hollow, beautiful golden color. So the cast iron pan really is what's going to help to develop that crust and the color on that crust versus just going into it like in a pan in the oven. This is what's really going to help you develop that. So it's really essential to your no-knead bread. And so now it's ready to go. So you can eat it, you can save it, keep it on your counter for the next few days, keep it wrapped up, and then you can toast it, refresh it in your oven before you're ready to serve it. If you're looking for more long-term storage, you're going to be looking at a month or so in the freezer. The temperature that your refrigerator stays at actually is the most ideal temperature for staling, and so it's not good to hold in the refrigerator. So it's either freezer or room temperature for your breads. So you can see I'm going to go ahead and cut into it. But you can see that really nice crumb. It's really nice and tender, but we have that crunch, that chew from our crust. So you have some more options too with just customization. So when you're mixing your dough, if we kind of go backwards about 20 hours or so, when you're mixing your dough and you have your flour added, and right when it's about to come together, if you want to sprinkle in some seeds, some sesame seed, flax seed, some lightly chopped nuts or toasted nuts, some dried fruit, that would be a good opportunity. If your fruit is at all dry, you want to make sure you rehydrate it. So you would want to soak it before you add it to your dough and then strain that off and make sure they're really nice and dry. But that could be a lovely addition to it. You also could, in the stage where we go to proof it, so once we've shaped it, if you kind of spritz or brush the top of your dough with water, you can put sesame seeds on top, poppy seeds. The everything bagel spice is really nice with no-knead breads and just bread in general. So that could be a really nice addition. So you can really customize this if you want to kind of have fun with it and make it your own and just bring it from more than just flour, yeast, salt, and water. What can you add to it? What can you change with it? The other thing I wanted to note too was we used all-purpose flour, but if you wanted to use bread flour, you could. Bread flour has a higher protein content, which means it does develop more gluten, and it's a stronger loaf. So you would have a little bit more chew, a little bit more structure to your loaf if you were to use a bread flour. So that's another option. I hope that you enjoy your no-knead bread and excited to hear about all your results.